Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode, How Coaching Can Help You Be a Better Dad with Dr. Adam Waz. So today we have a special guest who is a pediatric anesthesiologist from Michigan. And he is an active member of a double physician family. His wife is also a physician and they have 3 kids. And we have been coaching off and on for a year or two. And in honor of Father's Day, Adam agreed to join me to chat about how coaching has helped his family life. And he initially came to coaching more for work, career-related issues, which most people do. And as most people discover through coaching, it helps everything else too. And given that there is very little out there about the dad doctor role in families and a lot less support for physicians who are fathers, we thought we would share this conversation about how this work can be helpful. So thank you so much for joining me. And can you introduce yourself and just share a bit about your journey in medicine, coaching, and as a dad, whatever you would like to share with everyone listening?
Yeah, Jessie, thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be on. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts and it's a bit surreal being on this side of things, but really exciting. So, like you mentioned, I am a dad and a husband first, so I'll start there. My wife is Jess, and she is a cardiac anesthesiologist and ICU doc. She's amazing. And then we have 3 kiddos, aged 5, 3, and 10 months, who keep us very busy, and 2 dogs who we mostly remember most of the time. I am a pediatric anesthesiologist and a peds cardiac anesthesiologist. And I live and work in Ann Arbor. I actually was born and raised here in Michigan, grew up here, and then spent most of my time training away from here. So did college on the East Coast, spent a couple of years living and working in Africa, back to med school away from Michigan. I did a combined residency in pediatrics and anesthesia because I love training, and then did my pediatric anesthesia fellowship here at Michigan. Stayed on faculty for a couple of years, and then went back and did a peds cardiac anesthesia fellowship. And so that's kind of my journey here. The way I found you when we met up was about 3 years ago in 2021. And it was that kind of post-COVID time where everyone was emerging from the real thick of it. And I had taken a renewed interest in wellness. I'd always been interested in wellness and well-being and those sorts of things. But was kind of doing a deeper dive and basically trying anything that I read about in the literature that helped physician wellness. And one of the articles I came across was coaching. And I thought, that sounds great. And I found you online and saw that you had also done some coaching for anesthesiologists at a place where I had trained. Seemed like just a great fit. And that led to, it was a nice timing because I was also making a career-related decision at the time, but found all of these other add-on ancillary benefits that made me become a kind of a convert and and a big advocate.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit what that first part of your coaching journey was like. Was it what you expected out of coaching?
It was and it wasn't. I think it was actually, I take that back. There was more that I didn't expect than that I expected. I told my wife recently because I should have mentioned also, we're now on our second round. So I worked with you 3 years ago, got a huge amount of benefit from it, and then had reason to come back recently to chat again. And I said that, whenever I talk with Jessie in a 1 hour session, I have 3 or 4 like aha moments where I actually stop talking for a little bit so my brain can process what you just challenged me with or prompted me with or said, which is a pretty high rate because that doesn't really happen to me throughout the rest of the week. And so that part was interesting and different. And then I think the other thing that I wasn't fully expecting was just how much of the work in progress and development goes on in between coaching sessions. And so a lot of it was working on worksheets, doing thought downloads, having conversations with friends or colleagues or my wife, and noticing things in real time that we then brought back to our conversations together, and the kind of iterative process with the work between. And I hadn't anticipated that either. So those were both pleasant surprises, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think many people don't appreciate that space in between. And I intentionally leave space in between sessions for that reason, partly because I work mostly with physicians who are so busy, as you have, 3 kids, 2 dogs, a wife, and a job. And it takes time to practice and fail and get stuck. And so I love giving people a chance to do that and then come back and say, this worked, this didn't work. And I think as I think back about your journey, how you had a lot of benefit and epiphanies in between, and or you'd reach out by email and say, I've got this part, but I'm stuck on this part. And I think it's a tremendous value that we're not used to thinking about, even as physicians. Like, we don't think about what happens. I do outpatient more than inpatient, but what happens between and what families are working on. And we sort of see it as a point in time, and that's all that happens in that point in time.
Yeah, there's some really interesting parallels there. And by the same token, there would be times where we would talk, and I would have an issue come up between conversations, and then I'd write it down and say, okay, I've got to, bring this to our next talk, and then would figure it out myself, or, trust myself, as we had talked about a lot of the time, and it kind of worked out, or I solved it over time. So that was a neat parallel also.
And before we jump into the dad part of the conversation, I would love to know your thoughts. Many people actually will do their coaching, take a break, and come back to coaching because they know it's the thing that helps them with the next step. But I'm curious what your thought process about coming back was. What was it about coaching that you knew would help you with this next phase?
Yeah, I found, like I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that I started and initially reached out to you was, just I was interested in any way of kind of improving wellness, especially because our family was going through it was a pretty stressful time at that time. It was middle of winter in Michigan, which is quite cold and gray. My wife and I were both working a lot, and we had 2 young kids at that time. And so there was the wellness aspect also, but like I mentioned, there was this career decision crossroads that was also leading to things where I had a decision to make about what direction to take my career. And then also just more broadly, some general questions about how I wanted to approach work-life balance, family work balance, and those kinds of things. And so that was the kind of initial impetus. Things, have been good and are still good, but I think sometimes another decision comes up. There's another crossroad, and it's a nice time. I will also say, outside of any kind of broader decisions, it can just be helpful to check in again, where a lot of the things that I learned or worked on, I continued over time. So, kept doing thought downloads or journaling, which really helped over time, and still do that. But it's kind of building up things that could be addressed, and then just kind of touching base and tackling them again. And so that was wonderful also.
And it sounds like you're willing to give yourself permission to get support. And I just raise that because many people aren't willing to do that. And they don't see that, like, oh, if I do this, everything else becomes much easier. And it likely is part of the reason why things are still fine and you're balancing 3 children, 2 dogs, a job, a wife, and a man moving now as well, right?
Right.
And so it's sort of, I think of it for myself as one of those things that allows me to do all the things I want without falling apart or getting overwhelmed. It's sort of the thing that helps me stabilize or stay afloat.
Yeah. The other thing I would kind of mention along those lines is I'm grateful to my department for some help with professional development funds and
Yeah.
the ability to, lean into those, because I think happy doctors do make better doctors. And also,
Yes.
I'm so grateful that I came to the decision I did on that first crossroads. As you might guess, it was,
Yeah.
how to approach and whether to do the pediatric cardiac anesthesia fellowship after being on faculty for a while, which was not an easy decision. And it just kind of highlighted that, so when I went back and say, hey, I'd like to do this again, we had to have some conversations about, is coaching a one-time thing? Is it an ongoing thing? And I just really said that I got a lot of benefit out of it, and I would recommend it to all of our faculty, where if
Yeah.
everybody could do it, I really think there'd be a huge benefit. And I think a lot of people haven't had experience with it personally, which is one of the reasons I like to talk about it, is just
Yeah.
because it's not something that's on everybody's radar. But I think once people go through it, especially with a coach that they trust and like, it can be a really great experience.
And one thing you bring up there is just asking to see, because you never know if sometimes they'll give you partial support to get started. Sometimes they figure out a way for you to use CME. Like, there are lots of different ways to get support. And I've had people do that and report back, and then they'll say, wow, like that really did make a difference. We would love to support more of that, for example,
Yeah.
especially for leaders in particular. I think that's a negotiating piece that a lot of people miss out on. I always like it when people have some of their own investment in it, because they're really invested in it.
Yeah.
But if your department is also asking you to come back and report back, that can be helpful.
Yeah.
Although one thing I do think is really important is when we get coaching from someone who's outside, who's not in our system, it also feels much more safe. And so for them to support you to be willing to do that is a lovely way to approach it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about dads and coaching for, given that Father's Day is upcoming, we're going to release this on Father's Day. And so I'm curious how coaching helped you with your work-life balance and dad role.
We spent a lot of time talking about this, which, I think does relate to work also, and that is the other, piece of the puzzle. When I first came to you, I had already made the decision to go to 80% FTE, which was a big decision that I'm still, in retrospect, a little shocked that I made. Just because I'm lucky to work in a division that is where that is very it's very common and celebrated, and it's pretty pervasive. And I think it's one of the reasons that our division is quite happy overall, is that we have a lot of faculty who are not 100% FTE. And so I had made that decision to go to 80%. And so the way it works in our group is that I had every Wednesday off. And so one of the things that came up was how to spend that Wednesday, because I've got this free day, which is just glorious. We're also blessed to have childcare 5 days a week. On many days, for whatever reason we didn't have childcare, I was kind of the pop-off valve, the relief. And I would, of course, do all the childcare. And take care of the kiddos. But there would be many days where we would have childcare all day, and it's kind of this open day. One of the things we talk about was how to spend that day. And one of the themes that came up a lot of the time was that I had a lot of ideas about how that day should be spent and how it should not be spent.
Mhm.
And how it should not be spent is any form of like self-indulgence or, time for myself. It should be spent in service of the family. So in service of the kids,
Yes.
or the house, or the dogs, or the outside, or, my wife, or the groceries, or anything, anything like that. And so we had a lot of conversations about that, getting to a place where I was more comfortable with how I spent that time, however it was I chose to spend that time. That is the big example that comes up.
And so what does a good dad do on a Wednesday off now?
Well, so it's a Wednesday today. Today was a little bit of an unusual day, but I happened to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and so I went to the gym really early at 5:30 when it woke up. But I was not there when the kids woke up, which I often am on the weekends. Every weekend I tend to be the early riser, and so I get up with them usually and try and let my wife get some extra sleep. But I wasn't there when they woke up. My mother-in-law is visiting, and so she and our nanny, who's amazing, helped get the kids ready and everything, and I was at the gym, which was awesome. But then after that, took my middle son to camp, took my oldest son to a tour of his new school, and then to his camp. Got to drive around with my wife, which is what constitutes a date a lot of the time, and got to spend some time with the family, before chatting with you. Before we had started working together, what I would have said is that, a good dad is awake with the kids or wakes up with the kids, prepares them breakfast, maximizes every single moment of time that they could possibly spend with them before school, definitely takes them to school, and then picks them up again at the end of the school day or preschool day. And then in between those times, makes sure that everything is set with the house, the groceries are, stocked and ordered. If there's any work to do around the house or outside of it, does that. For a while I had a rule that I absolutely had to have dinner prepared and on the table every single Wednesday, no exception, And we were having one conversation where you just said, Adam, what if a good dad doesn't wake up with his kids on Wednesday? And I didn't say anything for 15 seconds because the idea of that was just shocking and horrifying. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, that is my mental model for what I should be doing with the kids, is waking up with them and getting them off to school. But maybe it's okay that I don't one day. And so I think it was not too long after that they were kind of sick. I think they were going to stay home from school, and so there wasn't really much we could do because they were kind of stuck inside. Couldn't really take them anywhere because they were sick. It was also not the warmest weather. I woke up, played with the kids for a little bit, read a book with them, and then just decided I kind of wanted to go to the gym and get some other things done. I think I even wanted to work on a project for work, and did that, and the kids were totally fine with it because they were hanging out with their nanny, who they love and adore. They spent some time with me, and they kind of had their fill in that moment, and there were no tears. There was no crying when I left, like there sometimes is. And even if there had been, that's okay, because in the moment, that's how they felt, and that's how I felt, and we'll get past it. And so now I just have a lot less dad guilt about how I spend all these Wednesdays.
So what's your story? Because you have a story in your head that's a guilt-free story, that Wednesdays can be spent. What a good dad would do on a Wednesday is do a mix of things.
Yeah, I would say do a mix of things, but also do what broadly feels right in the moment. That's not to say just do whatever, because
A
that's
good dad trusts himself to make a
yeah,
decision.
that's a great way of putting it. Because most of the time what I want to do is take them to school and pick them up from school. I would say 90% of Wednesdays, I do that. And most of the time what I want to do is get groceries because it feels good to help the house like that and to make dinner. But on the days where something comes up and I can't do that because I've got something going on, I don't beat myself up about it as much as I used to, and I feel a lot more comfortable with it and trust that it'll be okay.
So it sounds like one of the things that you figured out is sort of how to prioritize what matters most. And I'm going to say in the moment, because I think many of us in medicine are black or white. My family matters the most, and more time spent with my kids is better. And then we can't trust that if we don't do that, it'll turn out okay, or it'll go just as well if you took some time for yourself. So it's prioritizing what matters most and then trusting yourself and trusting that it's all going to turn out okay.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, because what matters most is my family. That is how I identify the most right now, is as a dad and husband, in addition to who I am. And I always like the quote, show me your schedule and I'll show you your priorities, because I think there's some real truth in that.
Yeah.
And, Friday afternoon from after work, and if I'm not working until Sunday night, I am not away from those kids for more than, 30 minutes or an hour at a time. It's just kind of wall to wall, back to back. And it's a blast. And then same thing at night. And each of them has gone through like a little dad phase. My middle one is still in it, and my daughter, who's 10 months old, is entering it now, where they're kind of more, like they're a little more clingy to dad. And it's wonderful. And so I'm with those kids all the time, which means that some Wednesday mornings I could use a couple hours, and if I've got this gift of a couple hours, it's just wonderful to take it. Because I've spent a lot of great time with them, and it's okay to take a few hours. And so
And there hasn't been any ramifications with either your wife or your work that you've taken Wednesdays off and you've taken time for yourself, right? It's turned out okay.
No, I mean, and it has. And it's funny you bring up my wife, because this was a conversation we had a lot. I went to 80% first, and then at her old job where she was working a lot, she was working more than I do, and she was very, very busy. My hope had been to get her to 80% also. And even the phrasing as that comes out of my mouth is kind of indicative that
Yeah.
we were going to get her to 80%. My hope was that she would also have the chance to be 80% if she wanted to. And it just took a little bit of time with her work to get there. And I think she also had some hesitation about it. And I just had this massive guilt built up that
Yeah.
I was 80% and she was not. And it felt like I was not pulling my weight, like I wasn't, doing equal amounts of work. She also just her 100% FTE was a bit worse than mine. She worked something like 23 out of 52 weekends in 2022. It was a lot. She's very busy. Loved her job, but just really busy. Yeah, part of it was going to 80%, and I think I think when I initially made that choice to go to 80% in the first place, I think I even had a story as to why it was okay. I
Yeah.
said I was going to like do some consulting or medical legal work or surveys or real estate passive income or something and pay for the time. I couldn't. And she just said, Adam, it's okay to just be 80%. You can just be 80%. And then when I went to 80%, I said, great, I'm 80% now. And this is making a huge difference in my life.
Yeah.
We need to get you to 80%.
Yeah.
And she was
This is your fix, manage, and control it, right? She didn't necessarily even want to be 80%.
Exactly. I think she did, but there was a certain timeline that was going to work itself out and a certain timeline that she had in mind. And I wanted it to be faster, partly for her, partly to assuage my guilt.
Yes.
And she got there when she got there, and she was 80%. And then it was fine for both of us. And, I noticed that, to her credit, she didn't like, she approached those days off with much more kind of calm, and like she was just out of the get-go more like she had more equipoise about it. She was just very comfortable with those days,
Yeah.
whereas I had to work to get to that point.
And I wonder, and I don't know the answer, but I wonder if that's more a female thing, or it strikes me as just more a personality thing, because I work with a lot of women who feel guilty about working part-time, and then their day off is supposed to be the day to do everything else. And then the weekends are the day to do all the kids stuff. And so there is no time off.
Yeah. I think we both definitely feel it, that guilt at times. I think she was just able to move past it faster than I did. And also I think she was so busy and her job was so busy that having that extra day off, she really needed it and appreciated it too. So that was really great.
And so how did coaching help you also? Because you are just describing a very busy life with multiple children and 2 doctors. How did it help you change how you guys approached your relationship? Did it give you any tools there?
Yeah. I would say one of the things that we talked about a lot was trusting that everything will be okay.
Mhm.
I grew up here in the Midwest in Michigan. We are not known for our openness and honesty and saying what we think and having tough, open conversations.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that coaching helped with was that you could say a thing or have a conversation and trust that it would be okay. Trust your partner that everything would work out. Trust that they have the best intentions. Trust that they know that you have the best intentions also, and that you're both just, working on this thing, which is parenting and your relationship together, and working towards that. The other thing, I don't know if it was directly related to coaching, but it happened at the same time, is that we kind of made a renewed focus on date nights. And so, we try to make sure that we have 2 date nights scheduled a month, call our lovely babysitter all the time, and really try to focus on that. And then also, kind of related to spending time for yourself and recharging, we take a fair number of trips by ourselves, because it's pretty difficult with the kids at the age they are to take a trip, the 2 of us somewhere. We have a lot of help from grandpa and grandma and other people, but a multi-day trip is a bit tough. And so we both take trips by ourselves with friends to kind of recharge and get a little bit of time alone and kind of reforge that individual identity, which I think has been really great for our relationship and for
It's almost setting yourself up for success. That's what it
Yeah.
sounds like. You're
Yeah.
using that doctor skill of like hyper over planning to your advantage, which is fine. Like, honestly, in your spot in life, if you don't use that, nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah. I mean, two anesthesiologists, like the amount of planning and hyper planning and optimization that happens in this
Yeah.
household is pretty high with two anesthesiologists here.
So I'm curious, with two anesthesiologists and small children, the two words that pop into my head are catastrophizing and scarcity mindset, because you are experts, you are both experts at that. How has that come to play, and how has coaching helped with that?
I would say I think we do a pretty good job of keeping each other in check. At this point, we've been married 7 years. We kind of know each other's, quirks and tendencies and oddities, and it can both rein each other in a little bit. Um, and that's the nice thing, in anesthesia, if you need help in your room, you call a staff stat and someone comes in the room. And what commonly happens, I remember there's a story from residency where my colleague called a staff stat because she couldn't ventilate the patient. And she was looking all over, thought of all the things that might be wrong with the patient. The tube came out, there's a mucus plug, something like that.
I remember that whole mantra. Yeah, it's not called a mantra, but that you have to go through.
Couldn't figure it out. Oxygen saturation's dropping. Calls a staff stat. People run into the room, and she said, literally, as she heard the cavalry approaching the room, she looked down and saw that the drawer she had just opened, when she reclosed it, she closed it on the circuit, the breathing circuit, and so couldn't deliver any, tidal volume to the patient. But it was the act of calling for help, the act of like knowing that the cavalry was going to arrive, that let her calm down enough to see that that was the problem, because before that, it was just hard to see. I mentioned that just because sometimes having two anesthesiologists in the family, I'll be spun up about something and worried about something, and she can come in and say, hey, there's an easy solution to this, or it's not that big of a deal, or let's go, or it is a big deal and we'll figure it out together. And so I think that's helpful. It's rare that you have two anesthesiologists really worked up at the same moment. And I think that
I love that. Okay. And I love this idea of the act of calling for help, because I think that's really what coaching is it doesn't have to be a stat call for help.
Right.
But I think it's that willingness to call for help from someone outside who brings like fresh energy, fresh perspective to help you see the situation differently and provide that support. And it doesn't mean, because I think many times in many other specialties, that's like a weakness. If you have to call this staff stat, it's like, what did you do wrong? How come you're inadequate? And it's not that. It's actually like, that's what makes you a better doctor and provide better care and take good care of yourself. You don't have to do it all alone.
Yeah. It's kind of this interesting different approach to help that I think most people don't get much experience with. We're used to being mentored and taught, which often involves a lot of criticism in medicine. Yeah, there's a lot of support also. I think the coaching approach it's just different from any kind of teaching or mentorship that I had received to date. And we even had coaches in residency, and my coach was amazing. But I think the kind of holistic global approach to it, the all-encompassing approach is really helpful. And the other thing that I thought was interesting, especially the first time we worked together, was that it's not as if, I did not come to you in crisis, I would say.
Yeah.
I was feeling pretty good overall. We've talked about how I'm an optimizer, and so I was looking to optimize. And there were ups and downs during the time when we were talking, but the times when we talked when things were calm were in some ways just as helpful as times when things were more active, or there were kind of more needs or things to sort out or decisions to make, which is interesting, and kind of feeling that way now, where there's
I think when you're calm, in my experience, is when people actually make the most progress. Not that you need to wait till you're calm, because many people come and need to learn how to find calm again. But when you are in a calm state, if you think about your nervous system and the way your brain is able to take things up and consider things, it makes perfect sense that you would actually make more progress when you're calm. And so it's not that one is better than the other, but I do think that many people are like, I'm good, I'm going to wait till I'm in crisis. And it's like, actually, this is the kind of thing that you can make so much more progress when you're not in crisis, if you choose to move through life that way. And I love this idea of being an optimizer, because I think so many of us in medicine are optimizers, right? We're optimizing everything in our life, hyper productive, hyper vigilant, always trying to optimize. And yet you could decide that, wow, I'm going to optimize the way I move through life, which most of us think is indulgent or, I don't know, luxurious or a little bit over the top. And yet, given the things that we're trying to do in life, it's incredibly powerful. One of the things that I often say about coaching is professional athletes have coaches, and they are trying to do, a hard job. Think anesthesiologist, you're in the peds cardiac room. Like that to me is like a basketball game for Steph Curry. And yet you also have 3 kids and a wife and all these things. And Steph Curry has coaches for his mindset, his mindfulness, his basketball, his nutrition, his sleep, his weight, and I don't know what else. And in medicine, we don't have any of that support. And so to realize that you are functioning at a very similar level. And in your household, you have ICU docs. I mean, like, this is really important work. And so, of course, bringing some modality in like this to help you optimize would be brilliant.
First of all, thank you. That is probably the first and last time anyone will ever draw a parallel between me and Steph Curry. So I'm going to take that and run with it.
Take it. Yes. I'm from San Francisco, so I know the Warriors.
Yeah, and I spent some time out there, and my best friend's a huge Warriors fan, so that
Fair enough.
Especially relevant and complimentary. One of the this may have come up on earlier podcasts, but Malcolm Gladwell, Atul Gawande wrote about having his coach, the surgeon who he brought to the operating room with him, and talked about how patients, residents, nurses would give him funny looks saying, "You're about to do this really important operation on me, and you have a coach who's with you in the operating room." But it's true, and in part of this kind of experimentation phase with wellness, my wife and I hired, like, it was mostly internet or app-based coaches, but for things like nutrition and diet and exercise, it was great just to try out. You learn some things. You don't have to stick with it forever. It's not a forever thing. But it really changed my approach to all those things. And I gotta say, that period where we had all those things together and I was paying attention to all those things, I feel like things were going very well. Like, it was just a very well time. It was super helpful.
So tell me a bit about, of course, because it's one of my favorite mantras, how it helps you with parenting those 3 children under 5.
Of course, in meditation, those are like those should be the 2 requirements,
Yeah.
like when the kids enter the toddler phase, really. I think this came up one time because I don't know if it was, I was post-call. I think I was post-call and trying to take care of the kids. They sense weakness. And so that, of course, would they are like the pack of wolves out there where they saw like the injured, wounded, buffalo, which was me, post-call on 2 hours sleep. And they were just like, this would be a great time to throw a fit about something that's not particularly important. And so I think there was a fight over the favorite spoon in the kitchen or something like that. And it was a day that we were supposed to talk, and I think I was just not at my best. I'm sure that I was short with them. I, just not the best parent that I would want to be in that moment, not an especially proud moment, and feeling a lot of dad guilt about it. And I think that was one of the first times that you brought up the phrase, like, of course, that is the moment that they would decide to have a giant fight over a spoon and hit each other in the face with a car or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course that would happen. And I just love the phrase because it normalizes it. There's an element of acceptance to it,
Yes.
but also some levity where it's like, you just have to laugh a little bit about that.
Yeah. I like to, for post-call, for anyone listening, is that it's because you're tired. And so, like, you're tired, so it seems more complicated. It seems more of a problem. They're fighting because you're not at your best. So it isn't, of course, but it's also just an acceptance of, like, this seems like the end of the world because I'm tired. Tomorrow it might not. And I think things happen post-call because you're post-call. It's like, of course, this is going to be a hard day. And I think when we move into it that way, our high expectation manual shift.